Hey everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the first in the Maribyrnong Ideas Forum. Obviously, we've seen the budget and we've seen Anthony's excellent budget reply. And I want to take the opportunity to get some of Labor's leading thinkers to work on what are some of the big issues, but also to hear from people who support progressive ideas. So I could think of no better person to start off with than Tanya Plibersek, and I will come to her in a moment. I should first of all like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, their elders, past and present, wherever you are. I'm currently day 9 of a 14-day quarantine in Canberra, so I acknowledge the Kaurna people here in Canberra, and of course, wherever you are on this hookup. Education and higher education has been hard hit by the pandemic, but it's such a fundamental driver of the nation's prosperity, our productivity, and indeed our equity. International students alone have contributed about 2% or 1.95% of our GDP. So there's lots of challenges with the pandemic, on top of an already moribund government who is neglecting higher education. Now, before we get to our guest speaker, just a few housekeeping matters which I'd like to take people through. First of all, we are live on Facebook and on YouTube. For those of you who haven't been to one of these big mass Zoom town hall functions, they are designed to be relaxed, respectful, even perhaps sometimes respectable, but that's not a requirement, but certainly inclusive. A few things which will give you the best experience. We encourage you to keep your video on. Of course, we found it really does add to the sense of the collective participation. If you're on a computer or laptop, you can set your screen to gallery view, then you can see many of the other people who are participating. Now, asking questions, this won't just be Tanya talking, it'll also be Tanya and I hearing your ideas and perspectives. There's a chat function. Please use it to ask questions. You can make a comment. We welcome you to introduce yourself so we know who it is in the room when you make your contribution. If you're not able to use the chat function, there is a raise your hand feature. What will they think of next? Now, everyone's muted. We've got staff administrators who will unmute you if you're called upon during the Q&A. If you're feeling shy, just send through your question and we can refer to it. If you have any technical issues, please private message our tech support person. But now I'd like to hand you over to Tanya. She was a superb deputy leader of the opposition. She's a superb thinker. And I think her ideas about post-COVID and indeed the future higher education, I can think of no one better suited in the nation to lead this debate. So I'd like to hand over to Tanya. And then after Tanya's finished, we'll have a bit of a Q&A. And if you don't get all your questions answered, we will follow up everything which is submitted. Tanya.
Well, thanks so much, Bill. And I want to start by acknowledging that while you're on the land of the, did you say the Kaurna people? I thought you'd be, I'm on the land of the Eora people at the moment, and it's a great pleasure to be with all of your branch members and with you. And thanks very much. You've always been such an enormous supporter of education. I think we took a great education policy to the last election, and it was, you know, a real tribute to you that you were so focused on making sure that every Australian got every opportunity, because education obviously is such a key aspect of that. You're quite right. Universities are really suffering at the moment, and I feel so sorry for those poor Year 12 kids who are just right now going into their final exams. I noticed that Chloe wrote a fantastic article today about how tough Year 12 has been in 2020 for all those young people, particularly in Victoria, where the lockdown has lasted so many weeks. And it's extraordinary that they've managed to hold it together as well as they have. A real tribute to the class of 2020 and to their teachers and to the school administrators, the principals and their parents and other supports who've held it together at such a tough time. It makes it you know, doubly inexplicable that this government is taking the approach that it is, both to TAFE and to higher education. We've got 1 million people unemployed. There's likely to be another 160,000 unemployed by Christmas. As I said, Year 12's had the year from hell. No one's having a gap year next year because those entry-level jobs that people do straight out of high school to save a bit of money to go travelling, that's not happening. We're already getting to a stage where Peter Costello's baby boom that he encouraged with his $5,000 baby bonus all those years ago, those students are growing up now. So on top of the huge pressure to accommodate more people in TAFE and university that we would ordinarily have at a time of high unemployment and high insecurity in the labour market, we've also got this demographic bubble that's just now finishing high school. So there's never been more demand for TAFE and university, and there's never been a better reason to educate more Australians, because we know for individuals it's the ticket to getting a good job, but we also know for our economy, as we grow out of recession, we are going to need that skilled workforce. And before going into COVID-19, already 3/4 of employers were saying that they couldn't find the skilled staff they needed. And we were also, you only need to look at the numbers of temporary skilled migration to see how reliant the Australian economy was on bringing skilled workers from overseas to fill skills shortages here in Australia. So we should be investing in universities. What's this government doing instead? Predictably, for the Liberals, they're cutting substantial funding from universities. So the analysis, not that the Liberals will give you a straight answer on this, but the analysis is that their Job Ready Graduates package was cutting about $1 billion a year from university funding. And this budget repairs a little bit of the gap that's been left in the research budget because international students are not able to come to Australia. It's putting in $1 billion extra, but for 1 year, one off, when we know that the hit to university budgets of losing international students is about $3 or $4 billion a year. So for students, essentially what the government is saying is, we don't want you studying humanities, we're going to price you out of it. We do want you studying science, technology, engineering and maths, so we're going to drop the student contribution, the student share of what's paid for those courses. But in an extraordinarily weird move, what the government has also done at the same time is drop the government contribution to teach those STEM subjects. So the most likely impact is that universities will offer fewer places in those expensive to teach STEM subjects anyway. It's a dog's breakfast of a package, and I had very high hopes until pretty much the last minute that Centre Alliance senators would vote with Labor, the crossbench and Greens to block this package. The government was only confident of the One Nation votes, but last week in the Senate, Centre Alliance Senator Sterling Griff voted with the government. That's how close it was. We had, you know, one vote that actually made the difference between students paying up to $14,500 a year for a humanities degree or not, paying $6,000 or $7,000 a year for the same course. So the government has more than doubled the cost of a humanities type degree. Also increasing in cost are law, business, accounting, a whole range of other degrees. And the impact is about 40% of students will now pay $14,500 a year for their degrees. So close to half will be paying that top figure. And it means that, you know, a 4-year degree, you leave university with a debt of $58,000, which I just think is extraordinary, really. I just don't know how working class families would even contemplate taking on that sort of debt going into an insecure labour market at the same age where you want to think about, you know, saving a deposit for a home of your own and all the other things that happen when you're an adult, to start life with a $58,000 debt is just extraordinary, and that's the Liberals for you. So I might leave it there. I'm happy to talk about universities. I'm happy to talk about university research. If people have questions about TAFE and apprenticeships or schools, happy to go into those areas as well.
Tanya, the first question I've got, someone's asked me to read out, is what do you think the universities will look like in 5 or 10 years' time, and what's going to be the role of international students, do you think?
I think actually this is an existential crisis for some universities, and I would not be surprised if some universities actually close or amalgamate with other universities. We're already seeing some university campuses being closed, so regional campuses of universities just shutting up shop because they're not viable anymore, with the fact that international students aren't coming to Australia, and the fact that the government has deliberately excluded universities from receiving JobKeeper has meant 12,000 job losses so far, and they're the sort of permanent staff who are easy to measure because their contracts are being terminated. They're being sacked, made redundant. There's a whole lot of sessional staff and casuals, people who rely on universities for a living but aren't directly employed by universities, also losing their jobs. We're seeing thousands and thousands of job losses, and there will be thousands and thousands more, from, you know, the gardener of the person who's looking after the university grounds to the most senior professor and everyone in between. There is no one who feels, even the tenured staff don't feel confident of their jobs at the moment. And so I think it's very likely you'll see more campus closures. I think it's very likely that some more marginal universities will merge with other universities. I think there will be a wider gap between the richer universities that can rely a bit on their endowments and investments and so on, compared with the less wealthy universities that will really struggle. I think some universities will end up looking a lot more like TAFE, because they won't be able to afford to do the research that is such a critical component of university life. And as for international students, look, I am all for bringing Australians home first. I think it's really important when we've got 25,000 or so Australians stuck overseas that the government prioritises them. But for the love of God, why are there still 25,000 Australians stuck overseas? If we actually efficiently, safely bring people home, then we need to, the next step for international students is to start to look at safe quarantine passages. The Northern Territory government is about to do a trial with 70 international students in coming weeks. But if we don't get this right, this is our 4th largest export dollar earner. So we've got coal, gas, iron ore, universities. If coal or gas or iron ore had lost tens of thousands of jobs and was going to lose tens of thousands of more, you can bet that JobKeeper would have been available and the government would have had a plan for the industry. They're not only ignoring the plight of universities, they are cheering on the job losses as part of this bizarre culture war that they've got against universities. And I don't understand it. I just cannot understand the negligence and the hostility. I think I'll just finish on this final point for international students. We are competitive because we've got high quality education, we've got great universities, we've got a safe and welcoming community, people who are speaking languages other than English often want an English language education for themselves or their kids. Like, we've got some natural advantages. We are squandering those at the moment by being absolutely hostile. When I say we, I mean the Australian government, hostile to international students, seeing people queued up for food packages in a country like Australia is heartbreaking. We've said very clearly, Scott Morrison has sent the message that we want to take your money, but we feel no responsibility towards you. Well, there's other English language countries that are looking to invite those students to study there instead. Why wouldn't you go to New Zealand or Canada, for example? And the other big change is that countries like China have looked at the ranking of Australian universities in the research indexes and so on, and have thought, well, that's a quality education, I'll send my kids there. But the universities in countries that are becoming much wealthier, much more quickly, like China, are shooting up those rankings. So there's a very good chance that this is going to significantly impact this important export dollar earner and, you know, job creator and, you know, soft diplomacy tool that we have, and it will impact it for years,
Well, on that somewhat grim analysis, I've got a few comments, but I might just, can we throw to Steve? He was going to ask a question.
Oh, thanks, Bill. Hi, Tanya. Tanya, I'm a medical graduate. I grew up in Melbourne's West. I had a manageable HECS debt, and I now work as a hospital specialist, and I have something to do with research and the like. My only experience of the current government with regard to tertiary education and medicine was to have to argue in front of a Senate committee, a committee chaired by Bridget McKenzie a few years ago, to argue why the market shouldn't be allowed to run riot with medical degrees. In other words, unlimited numbers with degrees costing something in the vicinity of $250,000 to $300,000, which worries me, because that means that my profession will be only filled by people who've got enormous incomes. Could you please comment on where you think the future of those expensive, high demand degrees such as medicine and the like would go under the current government? But the other thing I'd be grateful for your input on is funding for and the system that we have in medical research. Melbourne and a number of other places around Australia have cultures of research and quality that are the envy of the world. And my strong sense is, with years of attrition for research funding, the NH and MRC is a poor cousin of what it used to be. Where that will go, and I think more importantly, because solutions matter, where will Labor take this when we're next in government?
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thanks. What a fantastic set of questions. We could have done the whole evening on medical research. It's a particular passion of mine. And when I was the health minister, I know this is just a little thing, but I changed the title of the portfolio so that I had health and medical research, because it is for individual patients being in an environment where research is taking place, it actually improves your likelihood of survival. And it's not just because you have access to the latest drugs and the latest techniques, but it's because of the culture of cooperation and inquiry that happens in a hospital, for example, when it's part of a research culture. And that beautiful new cancer centre that I drive in past when I come into Melbourne, that was something that we did when Labor was in government, and it always drives me crazy. That one, and Chris O'Brien Cancer Centre, and the Kinghorn in Sydney, and there was, you know, massive investment in beautiful medical research facilities. A lot of them we started when we were in government, and I Chris O'Brien in my own electorate, I saw Tony Abbott, Prime Minister Tony Abbott, cutting the ribbon on that beautiful new facility, having done absolutely nothing to deliver it or fund it or anything like that. these investments are so important for patients. They're so important for the medical profession, because I think we keep really highly skilled people in our hospitals, in public hospitals, in universities, because they have the opportunity of participating in research, and they get the intellectual and psychological reward of leaving a legacy like that, because they are able to train the next generation of specialists in their field as well. All of this creates an ecosystem of inquiry and discovery that benefits patients. It's also, of course, fantastic for our economy. I mean, you know, we are, by international measures of discovery, such as, you know, original publications in research journals and so on, it's such a cliche, we punch above our weight. Being able to commercialise some of that is incredibly beneficial as well. So we absolutely need to do better when it comes to our research, to keep up the research. We cannot afford to have a system of research that is where allocations are determined by the government. The health minister at the moment loves to announce you know, $100,000 for this or that priority. I don't think that's a sound approach. I think a peer-driven research agenda is much more sound than one that's seeking to stick a Sunday newspaper story about some you know, priority that the ministers come up with. And what we've seen in higher education at the moment is the next step is actually, because they're trying to give Dan Andrews a hard time about the Belt and Road Initiative, the government's got this foreign cooperation bill before the parliament at the moment that will make it really hard for universities to do international collaboration. They'll have to be registering, in some cases, tens of thousands of individual research projects. So the bureaucracy of that's just going to be a nightmare. On the question of where is the government going with degrees like medicine, I think for the moment, medicine will remain a capped degree, so that it is the best and brightest who will be competing to get into medicine. And some universities, as you know, are offering alternate pathways, so that you need to be smart, but you also need to show that you've got characteristics like empathy and good communication skills. So there's a lot of thought going into picking people who are suitable to study medicine and be doctors or medical researchers and so on. I am really worried about the notion that price should be the determining factor. But what's extraordinary is that right now, with this Job Ready Graduates package, a humanities degree is probably more expensive than a medical degree for some students, and that, or an arts law degree will be more expensive than medicine. And that also is quite bizarre when you think about the difference in cost to deliver those two degrees. So, and finally, the last worry I would say when it comes to medical students is but basically every university wants a medical school, and you are better having 20 fantastic medical schools. I don't know how many there are, but off the top of my head, but you're better off having 20 fantastic ones than 20 fantastic ones than 20 additional ones that aren't much chop. And so I don't think decisions about medical places or medical schools should at all be made on political grounds. And I think they have been sometimes by the coalition.
Spot on, Tanya. Listen, Tanya, we're getting lots of questions. So what I might do is
I'll be quicker.
No. I'll just do two at a time. People are hanging off you every word. So, okay, this one was from Michael on Facebook. what he says, what seems to be driving these changes to charges in higher education is the positioning of higher education as vocational, as providing work-ready graduates. What are your views on the role of higher education, on other ways of thinking about the importance of higher ed to Australia generally? And Wanda has commented, once again, regional Australians will be hardest hit. How will our students be able to afford fees, accommodation, and find jobs?
Okay, the Job Ready Graduates program, the government says it's about helping people find jobs, but I really think if you give people good information about where the jobs are, you can then trust them to be adults and not spend 5 years studying something that's not going to lead to a job. So by all means, let's give good information about you know, employability of graduates, graduate salaries, blah, blah, blah. Then let's let people make their own minds up. That's not what this is about, because humanities graduates actually have about the same rates of employment as STEM graduates. And I'm absolutely convinced that this is just an ideological mission from the government because they like poking fun at, you know, someone's been studying Russian literature for 5 years and how can that possibly be useful? In fact, when you talk to professional services firms, big accounting firms, big businesses, they say, well, information's changing so quickly. What we need are people who are bright, inquiring, can collaborate, are creative, are imaginative, can research information, synthesize it and communicate it. All of these qualities that humanities degrees are very useful for. There's two other things. So going to university is obviously to help you get a job, but it's also to help you find your passions and your interests. There's nothing wrong with thinking, I'm going to study town planning because I want to be a town planner, but I loved French at school, so I'm going to keep up my French while I'm at university. Nothing wrong with that. You know, actually adding to the sum of human knowledge and discovering something about yourself, and all of that is part of going to university as well. And thirdly, of course, research. And research has been very, very hard hit by the decline in international student numbers. We have lost thousands of researchers and the government has essentially turned its back. They've made some provision for next year, for 1 year, but as a system, our research system, we're losing so many smart people from research careers or from Australia. I mean, you know, when they're able to travel, they're out of Australia looking for more permanent funding.
Wanda also made that comment about the regional students.
The regional students. Yeah, look, you've got to look at the government's rhetoric versus the reality. They say that they want extra places to go to regional universities or regional campuses, but regional students want choices about where they study and what they study. And there's a real difference between, you know, this is a government that says we want, you know, there's a gap between attainment, university attainment in regional areas and in city areas, and we want to close that gap. I agree with that. In fact, I think it's terrible that you're 5 times more likely to have a university degree if you live in the North Shore of Sydney than if you live in Caboolture. But what we did when we were in government with uncapping places is the most successful Australia's been at getting more kids who are first in their family to go to university. The difference with what the Liberals are doing is if you're, you know, from a relatively well-off farming family, you've spent your whole high school at boarding school, you get greater assistance than some kid in the western suburbs of Melbourne or the western suburbs of Sydney, who is much less likely to have the family support to help them get into university. So they've looked at regional, but they haven't looked at, well, let's call it class as shorthand.
Spot on, Tanya, and I think people also like the passion with which you're talking about this. I'm getting that feedback. Hey, I'm going to go to David next, and he's going to ask his questions. Then I've got questions from Jonathan, Anita, and Lily, and Marlon. David.
Thanks, Bill. Tanya, I'm going to sneak in 2 questions here. I did a diploma, and during that diploma, I did an engineering diploma, but we did units in economics, bit of history, bit of literature, critical thinking. And at the time, Melbourne University were talking about doing that in their course to try and broaden the people just doing vocational and technical types of things. And, you know, they've got it to fruition. So I'm just wondering, with the TAFE, do you see any scope for doing the same thing in TAFE and making the course a bit more rounded rather than strictly vocational? And given the way TAFE with people in TAFE with private providers, do you see any future in TAFE? Can it be saved?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I was actually having this very conversation today. I absolutely think that TAFE should have that element of university life much more than it does. You're talking about, you know, young people or mid-career people who are changing jobs because their industry's changing, giving them the opportunity to not just do the thing that they know they need for work, but, you know, opening some new horizons into areas that perhaps they haven't thought of in the past, I think is a fantastic thing to do. What we need to do to enable it is to fund TAFE properly. This government has cut more than $3 billion from TAFE and training. We've got 140,000 fewer apprentices today than when the Liberals came to office. 2 years ago, they promised 300,000 apprentices and trainees. We've actually gone backwards since then. So, you know, we absolutely need to do that, but it requires TAFE to be rebuilt from the ground up. And part of the problem was, as you rightly identified, when we introduced contestability into vocational education, a lot of quite dodgy providers moved in and cannibalised the good work that the longer standing places like TAFE had been doing. They took all the, you know, the dodgy providers took all the cheap to teach people or cheap to teach courses and left, you know, left the things that were difficult and expensive for TAFE, and TAFE has struggled since then. So we need a really fundamental rethink of the funding mechanisms for vocational education. But I'll tell you something, you know, my dad was a plumber, and he did his apprenticeship in Europe after the Second World War, and he came to Australia, he had to redo his qualification. And he, but what I wanted to say about him is he spent his whole life, like if he had a bit of time on the weekend, he'd pick up New Scientist or National Geographic, or he'd watch a documentary. And this sort of false dichotomy in the government's mind that, you know, that they say that Labor looks down on apprenticeships and TAFE, the exact opposite is true. We just want people to have the opportunity not only to pursue the most pressing vocational skills they need, but also to have the opportunity to follow their passions, to learn about the world, to, as you say, to learn history and philosophy and art and literature and culture, like the workers' education colleges that were established, you know, 150 years ago by unionists to teach people how to read and write. The fact that you're doing a trade doesn't mean you're not interested in the world, and we should stop treating TAFE as though that's all that it has to offer, or stop treating TAFE students as though that's all they're interested in.
Yeah, here, Tanya. Before I go to Jonathan, I should say my father was a fitter and turner. He was a fiercely political person. Grandfather was a printer. They took, just because you do a trade, this government wants to create a reverse class warfare that they think that people who are tradies or families of tradies should be just put in one simple stereotype. And both Tanya and I are testament to the futility of that class view that they have. Okay, Jonathan, over to you, mate.
Good evening. First of all, I actually live in Caboolture.
Oh, there you go.
I live in Caboolture, so firstly I acknowledge the vulnerable people of land on which I am. Anyway, recently I began a course in my passion, which is I'm studying of ministry through the Trinity Theological College in Brisbane. That's my passion. I was lucky enough to secure a spot with the assistance of fee help. A lot of people, especially in my area where I live, aren't quite as fortunate, because a lot of people in this area are struggling with like, given the current climate, with everything that's going on, finances and things. So it's even more difficult for people in my area, particularly, to gain like spots in higher education, for example. So one of my main question was, with programs like fee help and debt fee help, what is will that be like protected under Labor? Will that be sort of expanded to include sort of managed students? And that sort of thing.
Thanks, John.
Jonathan, what 100%, we never want the cost of getting an education to be a barrier for anyone seeking an education. That applies to university, and I think it should apply to vocational education as well. Different states, as you know, have very different arrangements for upfront fees, and we went to the last election with a policy to offer 100,000 fee-free places for TAFE, but different state governments are also doing similar sort of things. We also introduced, when we were in government, a program called the Higher Education Participation and Pathways and Participation, HEP program anyway, which is designed to help people who, school kids and community members, think about whether university is for them. Because, you know, if you grow up in a family where you're the first generation to go to uni, like my brothers and I were, and particularly I think about my older brother who's 12 years older than me, no one can explain it to you. You don't know where to turn to for help. You don't know what it would be like. We actually have to change the culture of expectation in families to let people really think, am I interested in this? Can I do it? Not, that's not for me. That's not for people like me. That's not for people from where I come from. And you need a very deliberate approach to do that. So some of the HEP funded programs were things like getting graduates from a particular high school to go back and do mentoring at that school where there were low post-school, you know, further study numbers and so on. And if you are deliberate about this, if you offer pathways into university, like bridging courses for people who, you know, might have bombed out in high school for a whole variety of reasons, but have the will and the capacity and the desire to work hard and give it another go, you need an alternate pathway for people. You can't say the mistakes I made when I was 17 are going to define my life chances forever. I don't see a lot of evidence that the government is focused on this as an important area for them, but it's definitely an important area for us.
Hey, thanks, and thanks, Jonathan. So we've got we've got more questions queued up than planes used to land at airports. Okay, I'll work on that analogy. Okay, Anita and Jeff wanted to make a contribution, or maybe it was Jeff and Anita, but and then Carla and Malin. So over to you, Jeff and Anita.
Yeah, just an observation of the policy. It seems all very well to be wanting to drive people towards science and engineering degrees. What are they putting in place for the graduate employment programs afterwards? You know, in the case of engineering, the automotive industry in Australia is not here anymore. They don't make a whole lot of stuff anymore. it's going to be great to have a whole lot of engineers out there looking for jobs. We're going to qualify these people, these kids, and then there's nothing for them to do. They'll be, you know, packing bags at Coles or whatever. Is there anything obvious that they're actually doing? Are they sort of trying to incentivise employers to put in place anything beyond that? Like, is it just a bit of the old shop front going on?
It's just such a nonsense policy, because the economy is changing so quickly that, you know, government choosing what you study 4 or 5 years before you get your degree is a recipe for disaster anyway. I think we can probably trust people if we give them good information to make up their own minds about where their passions and their interests and their skills lie. We're actually sacking scientists at the moment. Like, they defunded the CSIRO, university research has lost billions. The government was just trying to take $1.8 billion out of the research and development tax concession. They're trying to take 1.8 billion out. They've put 2 billion in, something like that, and they go, well, look at us, aren't we doing great? We put 2 billion into research. No, they've just reversed the $1.8 billion cut that they were trying to legislate. I mean, these people are, you're looking for logic and consistency, and they are neither logical nor consistent. They are contemptuous of scientists when they talk about climate change. They're you know, doing everything they can. There's a natural move in Australia to increasing investment in renewables. If you talk to half of the government, that's about the worst thing that's happening, you know, anywhere. These people are vandals, and if you want more people to study STEM subjects, the best thing we could start with is making sure that we've got more qualified science teachers in primary schools and high schools. We've been spectacularly bad at that as a nation in recent years. Where does someone develop their passion for maths without a passionate maths teacher?
Yeah. Thanks, Tanya. I had a question that Lily wanted me to read out, and then Carla's got a point which I'm sure you have thought about. But this is Lily's question. What can we do as individuals in light of so many programs closing? My university, La Trobe, was forced to suspend my master's program, a master's of clinical neuropsychology, which is an important field in the current climate. So I started a petition. We had letters from supporting hospitals and organisations stating why the program should continue, but it wasn't enough because the funds just aren't there to keep it doing. So she says, what can we do moving forward? And Carla also makes an outstanding point along with Lily's, which is universities haven't been very good at advocating for themselves.
Yep. Yeah. Honestly, it frustrates me beyond belief how timid the universities are in some cases, and partly that's because the government is taking more and more funding decisions at a ministerial level. So universities are frightened that they'll miss out on extra places or extra funding. On that issue, thank you so much for doing the petition. If it's at all possible, I'd have a talk to Bill's office offline, but you should try and get an article into The Age and get them to ask Dan Tehan, the minister, why he's doing this. He said at the National Press Club that he wanted more people studying psychology because times were tough, and then he increased the cost of psychology.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I've got Malin was going to make a contribution now, and then I've got a question from Bart after that. Malin? Okay. I know Malin's there. So, Bart, we've got time for both questions. Whoever my staff can find first, Bart or Malin, they go, and then whoever we find second goes second. So it was Bart available to ask his question. Oh, there's two male.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, thanks, Bill, and thanks, Tanya. I'm Bart Zeno. I teach history in higher education, and obviously we are feeling all the things that you described, Tanya, not just for ourselves, but for our students and their equity and access. But the particular question we had, of course, was I guess a question and an assumption that Labor will go to the next election promising to reverse the fee hikes in the humanities from my perspective, but more broadly as well.
Tanya. Tanya, we're back to you. What history do you teach, Bart?
Or I teach, I research in Australian history and First World War, but I teach 20th century global history. I teach theories of history. We'll teach football history next year.
So, Bart, we haven't announced our policy yet, but you can judge us on our record. Last election, we took a $10 billion policy for universities to uncap university places. And last time we were in government, we doubled funding from $8 billion per annum to $14 billion per annum. So I can't give you details tonight, but all I can say is judge us on our record.
And Bart, Tanya and I are very committed to properly funding education. I mean, if there's one thing which drives productivity beyond anything else, it's education. But it's the right thing to do, even regardless of that argument. Hey, Malin's now unmuted.
Hi. Hi, Tanya.
We can hear you.
My question is to you, Tanya and Bill. Now the pandemic and climate change. Now this is, people say that this is new normal. So what is university's role to deal with this pandemic and climate change?
Yeah, what a terrific question. I actually was quite encouraged by you look for the good to come out of these difficult times. I was very encouraged that people started really paying attention to scientists, health professionals, epidemiologists, economists, modelers, and so on, when we were talking about how to handle the COVID-19 pandemic. And I really did hope that respect for these specialist professions and areas of research would translate a bit into respect for climate science. I haven't really seen any evidence of that from the government. I think there's certainly a reminder to the Australian public of how important our university researchers are, and the professionals that they teach, that go out and work as nurses and doctors and public health officials and all the rest of it. But I haven't seen a great change in the attitude from some of our colleagues in the Parliament.
No. Okay, now I've got observations and statements/questions from Kate and Naomi. I don't know if they want to speak to them, and the page makes a point too. So I just invite those three people. If you just let us know, do you want to make your points, or we can repeat them for you? So it's Naomi, Paige, and Kate. Oh, Kate's is from Facebook, so I'll read that one while we work out what's happening with Paige. I think Kate was saying that, talking about, thank you, Tanya and Bill, for your hard work. Okay, I didn't probably need to read that out, but thank you. Tian's cruel and stupid plans to destroy the humanities and universities are stealing our children's futures and loading them with unbearable debt that will impact upon them for decades. How will they ever be able to buy a home while paying off huge US-style college loans. They will destroy our universities and their reputations and impact severely on our country. I would take that as a statement, but a lot of accuracy in it.
Yeah, sadly true. Too accurate. Mm.
Yeah. Paige has made a point about university student unions are also struggling.
Yeah, so I used to work at a student union, and the main problem we came up against was similar to what the universities are coming up against now, which is the universities control the SAF funding for student unions. Therefore, student unions have to ride that line between how strongly they advocate for students and against staff cuts, because they end up losing their funding if they advocate too harshly against what the university is doing to them, and what the Liberals are doing to universities. So if they make too much of a fuss, they get their funding cut, and if they don't make enough fuss, they're not doing anything for students. So what is I'd like to know what the Labor government as well is going to do for student unions as well, and to keep student unionism alive so we can continue to fight for students.
Well, we won't keep attacking and undermining student unions. I see student unions as absolutely critical to student experience at university, making sure that students actually have a rich experience and a fair experience. Student unions are often the advocates to make sure that education is good quality, as well as making sure that you can have a decent kind of student experience when you're there. I don't know what to say to you. We are great supporters of student unionism. We have always fought, years of government efforts to undermine student unionism. These are the people that, they get into university, people like Joe Hockey, Alex Hawke, just a bunch of them who cut their teeth as young Liberals in student politics, making the case that student unions were a big waste of time and money and nobody should be forced to join one, while all the while taking the stipends of elected officials of student unions. Like, it is just maddening, really quite maddening, the hypocrisy and the double standards of these people. And it's like a game to them. It's like a sport that if they can show off enough their credentials for smashing up student unionism, then someone will give them a job in an MP's office, and that's, you've really made it then. It's just, when I see the work that student unions do to make sure that students who are struggling get fair treatment, to support the provision of services that are critical to students, like in many places childcare and so on, it just drives me crazy.
Okay, well, the last comment / question, although Carla says in the chat room we haven't done enough for student unions, well, I say, Carla, you should see the clowns on the other side of the aisle. Naomi says on Facebook, Whitlam said that we believe, oh, good, Carla, no, thank you. Whitlam said, we believe in a student's merit rather than a parent's wealth. He went on to establish one of the most forward-thinking education systems that we have had in Australia, investment in the future of the country. She goes on to say, I grew up in rural Australia and received a free education. I'd not have been able to go to university otherwise. Will we pursue an education policy that abolishes fees and values education as something which creates a balanced and forward-thinking society? I might invite Tanya to wrap up with that observation, and I'll say something at the very end.
Okay, thank you. The question really is asking about free education, and I would love to say to you tonight that yes, we can do that, but I don't think we can. And the reason is that even when Whitlam was opening up our universities and making them accessible to more working class kids, we were still talking about quite a small fraction of our whole society that we expected to get a university education. We actually want we set a target of 40% of people between the ages of 25 and 40 having a bachelor degree or equivalent. We exceeded that target when we were in government. We got there faster than we had planned, and we exceeded that target. We did that by uncapping university places. The trend is actually, there's a threat that we will start to see a shrinking share of our community with a university education under this government setting. So that's what the modelling tells us. If we want to have at least 40% of people with a university degree, and I would say the bulk of the rest with another type of qualification, including a TAFE qualification, post-school qualification, we're looking at a workforce where 9 in 10 jobs that will be created in coming years require a post-school education, either TAFE or university. So if students pay a bit towards that, it makes it more affordable to educate, you know, 40, 50% of people at university, 40, 50% of people at TAFE. It should never, though, be a barrier. It should never be a barrier to someone deciding to get an education. So there needs to be proper support for people with their living expenses. There needs to be pathways into university education, like enabling places that are free. Because if you've struggled in education and you don't know if university is for you, you need to be able to try it out for free to see whether it is for you. Same with TAFE. There will have to be low cost or free places, particularly in areas of shortage. It's a no-brainer. And when it comes to universities, low fees paid back slowly through the tax system when you're earning a decent wage. I think most people have accepted that now. I'd love to be able to do it for free. I don't think we can afford it right now, but it should never, ever be a barrier. And I genuinely believe that the balance has gone way too far with these $14,500 a year degrees that the government is foisting on 40% of students now.
Hey, thanks, Tanya, and thank you, everybody. Tanya is, without a doubt, and we've all been reminded of it tonight, one of the most intelligent and passionate political leaders that we have in Australia. And, you know, I think that her application to this area of policy is second to none. Education, and it's shown by the interest, the people who've tuned in on Facebook, the people watching it on YouTube, well in excess of the people on the Zoom. The most harmonious, cooperative, equal, participatory and prosperous societies are also the most educated. And we're learning all our lives, and the proposition that we are cutting, you don't cut funding in higher education to a greater society. So thanks, everybody. This is getting us thinking about post-COVID, and we've got future speakers coming up this year, including Jim Chalmers, our Treasury spokesperson, Andrew Lee, and Claire O'Neill. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks, Tanya.
Can I just say one last thing, Bill? In a few weeks' time, I'm releasing a book that I edited about post-COVID, and if people want to read a bit more about education policy, I've asked myself to write a chapter in my book on education policy. So it's called Upturn, a better future post-COVID-19 or something like that, a better normal after COVID-19. So people should look out for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks.